We have COVID outbreaks, so people get disrupted, supply chains get disrupted, and yet somehow your organization, as well as many other food banks, find a way to distribute even more food. That's unprecedented.
I
It's
think,
something that we wish we could like go back and slow it down so we could see every little
yeah.
game-changing miracle that had to come into fruition to make that even happen.
Welcome back to 50 Faces of Feeding South Dakota. We're so happy to have you here as we continue to have conversation every week this year with somebody who has been involved with the last 50 years of Feeding South Dakota and can help share history and insights on the work that we're doing. Today, we welcome Patrick Colley with Feeding America. Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, to get us started, we're going to talk a lot today about what it means for Feeding South Dakota to be a partner of Feeding America. We get a lot of questions about that. What does Feeding America do for the fight against hunger here in South Dakota? But why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and your role with Feeding America?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Patrick Colley, Senior Director of Member Engagement with Feeding America. I've been with Feeding America for about 16 years, and I came to this work actually from working at food banks previous to that. So I used to work at the food bank in Jacksonville, Florida, and prior to that, at a food bank in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I got my start. So about 22 years or so, I've been as part of this network in various roles. And what my current role does is I work directly with a group of food banks, including Feeding South Dakota, to provide everything from long-term strategic assistance to everyday technical assistance.
So, 22 years. You definitely have a passion for the work that we're doing. You have to be in it for this long. What is your motivating factor for continuing this work?
I got into this really because more of a need than anything. I started as the IT director at the Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank, later moved into being the lead fundraiser, and later became the executive director at the food bank in Jacksonville, Florida. And throughout all of that, I thought this might just be temporary. I didn't know that I really had a passion for the work as much as I was really just enjoying the work and the results of it. So I was enjoying that every day, it actually mattered what I did to see real, effects, real impacts on the people that were actually getting assistance throughout all of the different avenues the food banks were helping. And over time, you realize like, oh, wait, I do have a passion for this from everything that I've experienced in my own personal life growing up to everything that I'm getting to see as a positive result of this. So it's kind of one of those things that you think and you hear about like, oh, people get into things, they have a passion for it, and they really know what they want to do. I find it's not always that way at all. I really liked what I was doing in IT and I had a passion for it. But when you actually start seeing it benefit people, and then you get to be in a place that every day has I like to say, a daily buffet of just complex problems to solve. That's really what kind of drives me internally. I like new problems. I like trying to find innovative solutions for it. And it happens that the work that we're doing is really complex. So, here we are, 22 years, and you don't even think about, how long it's been because every day is just still that constant opportunity to look at things in a new way and maybe try something different to ultimately have a positive impact on a lot of people's lives.
That was a really great play on words, a buffet of opportunities or challenges. So let's talk a little bit about Feeding America as a national organization because it's sort of like this umbrella, and many nonprofits have that type of association with a parent organization that provides some of that high level stuff. But your role is one of many within the organization structure. And we have been, as a food bank, a great beneficiary of the work that comes out of many areas of Feeding America, whether it's assessments and trainings on fundraising or food sourcing or operational logistics, best practices for communications and branding and marketing. That really is a help to a nonprofit, because it's no surprise we run on a limited budget, right? So we really have to stretch those resources, and that has been a great asset. But, when we talk about the history of Feeding South Dakota, and the fact that it started as two separate organizations. We had the food pantry on the eastern side of the state, and then we had the food bank on the western side of the state. Back in the day, when the Black Hills Area Food Bank was formed and they decided to become a partner of Feeding America, why was that such an important thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're talking about really like when you start thinking about what's happening around that time, that's right around the 80s, where you have a lot of different things that are actually happening throughout the US. Feeding America alone, back then used to be called Second Harvest. It was established in 1979. So even at the same time that this growing national kind of organization is happening, in South Dakota, you have these two different organizations that are also growing. Everybody is kind of looking at the problem from both a local to a regional to a national kind of perspective and trying to figure out how can we best address this. When the regional food bank in the Black Hills area joins the national movement that's currently Second Harvest, what they're doing is they're committing to starting to work as part of a larger unit and have a little bit more standardization in the ways that we talk with donors, the ways that we're sharing our messages, the ways that we're trying to work with national legislation as well as local legislation and with donors throughout the U.S. to try to actually communicate everything in a little bit more of one voice and make it a lot easier for everybody to kind of get engaged.
There's a lot of things I want to unpack that you shared. And I want to go back to when we were preparing to start this podcast. I spent some time looking back at 1975, and I'm not going to disclose if I was or was not on this earth at that time. But looking at sort of what was happening in 1975, and of course, I went straight to what was the food insecurity rate, and
Mhm.
it didn't exist. But learned that the nation was coming to the end of a recession. They didn't know it at the time, but it was coming toward the end. Prices had gone up, benefits had been maximized, and so I can imagine the drive on each side of the state identifying families and people who just can't put food on the table and can't work at this point in time, that we've got to do something and we've got to help. And that has remained constant throughout the last 50 years of the organization. Is we have this great group of we've got to do something and we want to help, whether it's volunteers and donors, staff, community members, all the way up to other food banks and Feeding America. And it's one of the things that I appreciate the most about the network is just today I sent an email out to about 5 contacts and said, hey, I'm looking to go down this path with a strategy. What do you have for tools and resources so that we're not reinventing the wheel? And so that's really great. But those commodity programs and those measurements started to come around in the 90s. And that was when we could really get a grasp on what are we looking at here? And, this is going to fluctuate. And so we have to think big. And that's what happened at that time, is just the continuous collection of food banks within this network that grew and grew. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people don't understand all of the pieces that can go into this work. It's not as easy as packing a bag of food for the backpack program that goes home with a child every weekend. A percentage of our food does come through those commodity programs that's funded through federal legislation. And there's many hoops and steps involved in distributing that food. But we have to continue to advocate for that. We have to continue to speak on behalf of the people who need that food so that we can continue to have it to distribute. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that food sourcing. Um, you've been to South Dakota a few times. We're not a land of oranges and, all of the great food in plenty that is needed for a healthy diet. And so a percentage of our food comes through the Feeding America network. And it may be a misperception on my part, but I think that's where a lot of people associate Feeding America is that's how Feeding South Dakota gets food. Talk a little bit about that process that Feeding America has and everything that we are having conversation around with every person so far has been defined like pre-COVID and post-COVID. And so we can get into those changes later. But as Feeding America begins to grow as this parent organization for these food banks, talk a little bit about what work was being done or that process for bringing food in for those partners.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a misnomer because there's so many different national networks, as you had said, like that exist out there. Feeding America is very unique in that it's a national network that was founded by the members. So we, kind of flipped the script. It was
Mm-hmm.
founded from all of the organizations that came together to create a national office that says, we need you to represent us. So from its very origins, Feeding America has very much been, and we even say now Feeding America National Office to try to distinguish a little bit because we really think of Feeding America as the entire network of organizations. And that national office really is just there to exist as a service to all of the network and to essentially be that coalescence of voices. We have, I like to really describe Feeding America as having two things that we manufacture, which is just knowledge and relationships. And that excludes a lot of other things like food. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have a warehouse that we own. We don't have a food manufacturing, plant over here that's processing food. The work that's really being done throughout all of the logistics, which there are literally billions of assets moving around the country every day that go throughout this network to feed people, that's being done by all of the regional food banks, places like Feeding South Dakota and all of the networks that they maintain of the different food pantries and the after school programs, the meal sites, and all the different partnerships. So Feeding America's job there in manufacturing both knowledge and relationships is to go out and build relationships with all of the major retailers, all of the major chains, the different grocery stores, the restaurants, the growers, the producers, and even work collaboratively with organizations outside the U.S. Where food is coming in. Because as you said, all food is not grown in all places. It's rare that any of the diets that we enjoy, all the stuff in our fridges at home, doesn't come from somewhere within a 10-mile radius of our home. It's
Mm-hmm.
traveling from many different cities, countries, all to get here, all to be aggregated. So we actually have choices, in the foods that we eat. And part of trying to make those choices available to everybody is really creating this kind of collaborative and coordinated effort to move a lot of food throughout a whole system while still keeping it safe, still keeping it fresh, and making sure that it's actually getting to people in a way that they can use it in the ways that they need it. And we don't talk about it a whole lot when we think about the larger scope of hunger and people that are facing food insecurity. But there is a major logistics
Mm-hmm.
side to this very large supply chain that is going on that we call essentially this Feeding America network.
Yeah, that was a really big eye opener for me when I started with the organization 3 years ago. And Lori and I have talked about that. Uh, you can know operations, but you really have to know fleet. You have to know logistics and building efficiency, especially when we're one of a few statewide food banks. And so we're covering the entire state, and we're grateful to be able through partnerships with community partners like food pantries and meal sites, as you mentioned, be able to get food into all 66 counties. But that takes some trucking and it takes some staffing. And that's just on our end, in the immediate. That's happening every day. But additionally, it takes pacing the food that we're acquiring and getting it in a time and a way in which we can, to your point, keep it safe, not have excess that's going to spoil. We can turn around and get it right out. We can store it. We can, and that's something that our food sourcing team works diligently on, is making sure that not only are we getting the best price, but we're getting the right amount of food so that we're not busting at the seams, or we're not, having minimal things on the racking. We want to be able to continue to provide that food to our partners, much like Feeding America does. So pre-COVID, there was almost like it felt like almost an abundance of food for accessibility, as you were talking about on a national level. And then we came into COVID, and the poundage that Feeding South Dakota received in that time skyrocketed. I think 17.5 million pounds. And really because grocers weren't open and restaurants weren't open. And so a lot of those types of foods were coming into food banks to get out, because there were still people who were hungry, more people who were hungry than before. And now post-COVID, we've seen a little bit of a change in that. And that has proven to be a bit of a challenge for our food bank. And I think it's the same for other food banks, in that grocers have gotten more savvy about how they stock things. And there's less excess in the market available, which takes a shift to having to purchase food in order to fulfill our program needs. How do you see food banks or Feeding America dealing with that challenge?
I mean, it's definitely been just one of the largest ones, because we think of food as something that's kind of evergreen. It's accessible, and this is just simply a problem of getting enough food out to people and everything. On the surface, that makes a lot of sense. But what is happening underneath is every month, every year, there are changes to different policies, different supply chains, different geopolitical things that we may not even think about, but absolutely affect the cost of every single agricultural commodity and the cost of all of the resources that are required to deliver those things. So as different things change in marketplaces, we see those effects, usually not immediately, but sometimes years down the line. And so we're always dealing with a history and sometimes an avalanche of previous policies, previous droughts, previous supply trade negotiations that are showing up years later. And we see people that are facing hunger as sometimes being underreported, or even essentially being reported in what we consider to be a lagging indicator of some of the other effects that have happened, previously. So when we think about like the pandemic, like there's going up to 2019, there's definitely food availability, but we're also still seeing people that are reeling from everything from natural disasters to going all the way back to the Great Recession around the 2008, 2010 timeline. Those people that grew up during that time are now becoming young adults. They're trying to, get jobs, and they may not have had the resources in their family when they were growing up to have them have the best start forward, as they enter the workforce. And so, you see all of these different kind of complications just sometimes unfolding, even when we're looking at one time period and thinking, oh, what's only going around here? So as the pandemic comes in, yeah, a lot of people suddenly are definitely faced with a whole lot of different choices they have to make, a lot of different situations. Our network as a whole went up to 6 billion pounds during the
Wow,
pandemic in the first
that's
year.
incredible.
First time we ever even hit that unimaginable number. And I would say, there's a huge acknowledgement, very much on Feeding South Dakota's part, because you're not even doing that with all the resources you had. in
Mm-hmm.
2019 when the need skyrockets in 2020, when suddenly you have different organizations that are shutting their doors, people that are no longer at work. We have different workplace restrictions. Food manufacturers have to shut down. We have COVID outbreaks, so people get disrupted, supply chains get disrupted, and yet somehow your organization, as well as many other food banks, find a way to distribute even more food. That's unprecedented.
I
It's
think,
something that I we wish we could like go back and slow it down so we could see every little
yeah.
game-changing miracle that had to come into fruition to make that even happen.
Absolutely. And I really think it goes back to our opening conversation about your drive for doing work within the network. And that when you see, really, in talking with Matt Gasson, our small town food pantries were closing. It wasn't safe for people to come in, but people were hungry. People needed food, and so Feeding South Dakota and many other food banks had to pivot in a way that was innovative or risky, something they hadn't done before, and they really had to pivot so that they could continue to serve our neighbors facing hunger. And every time they saw that impact, every time those long lines were at the fairgrounds or in our rural communities of people that just came to get that food, every time you see that, it just drives you to do more and more. And I think that's what really propelled the movement as a whole to get that amount of poundage out into the communities. But when we talk about food, I will say often, and I forget that there's a lot of buzzwords in food banking. I almost feel like there should be like a guide on your first day when you start here. When you hear somebody say this, here's what it means. But we say foods to encourage a lot. And Feeding America has a strategic desire for food banks to have high foods to encourage percentage. Talk a little bit about that.
Foods to encourage really just is an acknowledgement that they're the foods we really want to try to encourage people to have more of because we know that filling, all of our bellies with lots of cheaper foods that are usually a lot more carb rich and a lot, or maybe,
High sugars.
yeah, you
Yep.
know, they taste good at the beginning, but later on you're dealing with, all the
Yep.
different complications. You don't deal with them that day. You deal with them 5 years from now, or
Hmm.
10 years from now, or maybe a lifetime from now. But all of those things that we deal with later on are all additional costs to us. They're costs to the economy, to the healthcare system, and they're things that sometimes create that generational issue of either poverty or nutrition or cultural habits.
Yep.
Foods to encourage is really just a way of looking at all the foods that we can provide, trying to encourage the ones that are a little bit healthier options for people, while not completely saying no to all the other foods
Sure.
that may still offer that cultural connection or just that comfort that we all
Hmm.
also need.
So I want to talk a little bit about, so foods to encourage is one of the numbers that we're really proud of. We're always up in the high 80s because it's not just about getting food, it's about getting the right food. But one of the Feeding America is just so great. So we've talked about sourcing food. We've talked about Feeding America really as our parent organization helps us with safety. We have to pass a inspection on the regular with like document retention and fiscal integrity, all of those things. But another thing that the organization has been so great about is research. And I always say, like, I'm a consumer of data. I'm not a creator of data, but I love to tell a story from data. And the Map the Meal Gap report that comes out annually, I know it had a little blip during the pandemic, but it comes out annually. And we use it as within Feeding South Dakota as a measurement of the work we need to do. And it's so true that hunger doesn't just exist in every county in South Dakota. It exists in every county in the nation, in the richest nation in the world. Food insecurity, people are hungry in every county. And that that data that Feeding America is pulling together to show the food insecurity rates by county, but also by diversity, by age, to help identify those sort of root causes is really important to the work that we do. But I got to tell you, as somebody who puts all their efforts into our mission to end hunger, which is lofty, it's hard when every year for the last 3 years that I've been here, that food insecurity number has gone up. And it's we want to measure our organization's success by seeing that number go down. But with so many contributing factors, that's a difficult thing to do. So even if that number starts to come down, is it an accurate measurement of success of fighting hunger in South Dakota? Or what does Feeding America look at to say, hey, they're doing really well toward that mission and toward the strategic vision of the nationwide organization and food banks?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a challenging thing because as a network, as a food bank, you're very much focused on moving food as a hourly daily practice
Mm-hmm.
to people. That is very much the main part of our effort. How many hours we think about all the people, the 15,000 staff that we have throughout the different food banks in the Feeding America network. That's what the majority are concentrated on every day is that movement of food. There's other people that are also, very much engaged in the advocacy work and sharing the stories and sharing the education and doing the research and really helping people to understand the much larger picture of why people face hunger and why these numbers are growing, even though
Mm-hmm.
the amount of food that we're distributing every year has been getting healthier and it has been definitely going up. So, what gives? Why is this, essentially not going away? Why is it not ending? And I remember there was a CEO of the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank that stood up during a conference over a decade ago now. And Joyce Rothmel, she stood up and she said, after all these years of being here, my, greatest regret is that there's more people hungry today than when I started. And when she said that, I'll never forget this moment. The room just went quiet. All the CEOs, leadership, board members from all the food banks across America are sitting there in just silence. And it was a tear-jerking moment because
Yeah,
it feels defeating at some point.
it does. It feels heavy.
It does. And,
Mm-hmm.
the problem is if we hold ourselves accountable as a food bank or even as a network of saying, okay, if the amount of people that are food insecure goes up, we're not doing, our best. We're not having an effect. It's really disjoining what the reality is out there and the effect that, that
Mm-hmm.
we actually have that is within our scope. Within our scope, we can help people on a daily basis and we can advocate for change on a systematic level for the long-term basis. But what we can't do is we can't stop every natural disaster. We can't stop every employer from suddenly, closing their shop, laying off a lot of people. We can't stop the medical things that happen in people's lives that suddenly cause a family to very large, medical bills and put them immediately in debt. All of these things are everything from very, very personal effects that, happen in life to an individual or to a family to, larger scale things like
Mm-hmm.
natural disasters. We're not the organization that has all of those missions as well. It takes an entire community and it takes a much larger scope of all the governments, all the nonprofits, and more importantly, just literally all the people to actually care about making all of those differences to make poverty go away. But as long as there's some type of poverty, there's going to be people who are making those choices. And when you're making those choices, that's where we start seeing people be food insecure because that's just one of the more easy ways that, people can quickly adjust their financial situation. So our job really as much as we hope all of that to also come into play and to also be effect, our job is still on a daily basis to make the most difference that we can to the people that are facing food insecurity today. So, as Feeding South Dakota, when you look out and you say, "Hey, today we distributed this many meals, we helped this many organizations then distribute those many meals, we helped provide this amount of care, we helped check on this many seniors, we helped this many after-school programs stay open." Those are the real impacts that you get to be proud of, you should be proud of on a daily basis. And that's what should give you that fuel for then bringing everybody else into the mix and telling them, hey, we can all do even more if we all get together and work on this.
Well, there's no doubt that when you talk about all the people coming together and the community coming together, it takes all of us working together. And there's no doubt that you can't deny food to somebody who is hungry. I mean, it's a fundamental need. We've all had the physical hunger sensation, but this goes beyond that, in that these families or these individuals go to their cupboard and there isn't food there for them to access. And so in the past 50 years, Feeding South Dakota has really optimized the work that we do. We've merged together these two originating organizations into one. We're present in all 66 counties. The number of families we're serving continues to rise every year. But now here we go into the next 50 years. And, we keep in touch with the trends and what's happening in other areas of the country. We always say there's a ripple effect. It hits the Midwest kind of last. And so we can sort of see a little bit what's coming. But as we talk about all of those various impacts and the work that we're doing and this lofty mission, as the partner within Feeding America that's working with our organization on the regular, what do you hope for Feeding South Dakota in the next 50 years?
I think really we were just talking about research, and research alone is something that I think we're still kind of new at trying to understand. What more can we understand? Just in the past couple of years, through a program that we called like Boundless Collaborations,
Mm-hmm.
Feeding South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, your four states got together and started really looking at how could we be better at serving all of the native and tribal communities. And one of the biggest things was we need to understand more
Yeah.
about who it is that we're trying to feed. And so you all have been doing this entire collaborative project to understand, well, how, is it just the food that we're providing, or is it more that we're providing? And are we providing those things? What is the most important things? And I think you all are already finding a lot of learnings
Mm-hmm.
out of that. With it, you've also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you all have like embarked on this huge educational project as well
Yep.
for your staff or
Yep.
all the staff at the food bank, right? Wasn't there like a video series that
Yeah. Yeah.
you all
The
did?
the team has gone through a cultural learning series, which was created within tribal communities. It's the voice of tribal members sharing about relationship building and trust building and the history and the impact of food changes that has had on that culture. And it's been a fascinating learning opportunity. And as we bring new team members on through within these four states, they'll continue that learning series so that everybody has that foundation. And it's been a really great way to reach beyond our borders, so to speak, and say, again, together, collectively, what is the best way. But for me, what really, really resonated that I've appreciated about this project is that it really drives home the understanding that solutions have to come from the people who are challenged. And we can't make decisions on what we think people need. We really need to hear from them, whether it be a program that we're starting in a community or a policy change. We may think that option A over here for SNAP benefit availability is the best thing, but it might be option B. And so learning from community and from those who are really facing hunger and immersed in that situation is the best way that we can move forward in being collectively impacting the movement.
So, I mean, that's what I would illustrate right there. That's the next 50 years that I would hope for. It has a theme of collaboration, of understanding who it is that you're serving. And as we know, like over those years, that's going to change. You're not going to know it today and then be able to work with it.
Hmm.
It's going to be continuous learning as people's needs change, not just in native and tribal communities, but all of the different communities, in South Dakota. As your state changes, as different organizations come in, go out, all of those
Yep.
changes require you all to have a deeper understanding. And I think if you look at the next 50 years, I would say a deeper understanding of who it is that we're serving, how it is that we're serving them, and how it is that we're moving from just serving to actually empowering so that they are generating the solutions, just like you're saying, so that the solutions come from people. What is it that we could best help you help, all of your homes, your families, with? And really trying to figure out that as we look into the future, making sure that we as an organization can be adaptive to all of the different resource changes that are inevitably
That's
going
a
to
great word.
happen, all of the different, information that is going to change, and how we have to use that information. But I think it really means that we have to move from as much as we might do things as a one size fits all, either in, smaller areas or regional areas. We have to move to things that are both efficient, but also very much customized. And that always is this duality between cost and efficiency, but also the actual trying to give people more targeted resources in what they actually need to thrive. And so I kind of hope like the next 50 years looks like a better understanding of and deeper understanding of all the people that you're serving, more collaborations, both inside the state as well as regionally, maybe even nationally, so that you're able to get more access to the resources that the people need, and really figure out, are there more efficient ways that we can do this, through different logistics, different information, different empowerment to, continuously adjust to whatever the next problem is that's coming down the road. Because it's not going to be one food bank that's going to carry you in the next
No.
50 years. It's going to be hundreds of iterations of Feeding South Dakota and its network and its all of its partners that's going to, be able to address those daily challenges year after year after year.
Well, I'm going to send you a calendar request for 50 years from now, and we're going to sit down and revisit this vision that you have. And I will also start making hash marks on my wall for every iteration of Feeding South Dakota that we evolve to fight hunger,
Very
so
good.
that we can see how many phases that is between now and then. Well, before I go, I have one very important question for you. If Feeding South Dakota were a fruit or vegetable, what would it be and why?
Feeding South Dakota is actually, let me tell you why first. One of the really unique things about Feeding South Dakota is the amount of effort that the organization puts into getting food into every single one of the counties. Now, every food bank does that with a variety of different ways, partnerships, logistics, whatever those may be. But Feeding South Dakota uniquely has one of the highest percentages of direct delivery distributions in our entire network. So literally your staff, your trucks are carrying food throughout all of those. And so that makes me think of fruits and vegetables that tend to spread, tend to really move, further.
Wow.
And I kind of think that a grape is probably the most descriptive of that vine that keeps spreading. But I also like grapes because you never really think of just one grape. You always think of a bunch, like an aggregate. And that to me is very much descriptive of a food bank as well. It's an aggregate of the many different things that a food bank is. It's everything from a supply chain and logistics organization to a community organization to a food pantry to a foundation that is supporting many other nonprofits in the network. You're an advocacy organization. You're a donor partnership engine. You're so many things to so many different people. And so that bunch of grapes really just kind of that's where my head's going right now for you all.
I think that is an incredibly creative answer. And I am so impressed that you came up with that and so many correlations to it in such a short amount of time. So I did not prepare you for that, but it almost seems like I did. Well, Patrick, thank you for joining us today. Great conversation as always. I think we could talk for a really long time, but just want to thank all of our viewers for joining us today for this conversation with Patrick and diving into the Feeding America parent organization and how that partnership with Feeding South Dakota through food sourcing, through advocacy, through data and research and just future vision really helps drive our mission to end hunger in South Dakota. We sure hope you join us next time on 50 Faces of Feeding South Dakota.